On Sunday night, I had the delight of gathering with the middle and high school students in the Faith Formation program at St. Mary's in Coxsackie. And we did something very simple. Everybody had index cards and they could write down any question that they wanted answered. And then I did my best to answer them. And some of the questions were interesting. Somebody asked me, how do you know if what you're wearing to church is appropriate or not? Someone else asked, why is it wrong to flip someone off with your middle finger? Why is that a problem? And at first I thought, I don't know the answer to these questions. And then I realized, actually, I do. And it's all in today's gospel. I know the answer to those questions, and you do too. What are we to do? To love God with all of our heart and our soul and our mind, and to love everybody else as we love ourselves. And Jesus says, it really actually is that simple. All the law, all the books of the law, they boil down to that. All of the teachings of the prophets could be summarized in that. So what we're supposed to do is remember who God is and remember who we are. Awareness of that is enough. If in any given moment we were totally aware of how great God is and also aware of who we are in God's sight, in that exact moment with that awareness, we actually could not sin. It would be impossible for us to sin in that awareness. An easy way to say it is that life is a school and love is the lesson. We are all in school right now. This is a great big school, and our job is to learn how to live in love and in awareness all the time. So here's the lesson in today's teaching that we received from the master teacher. We need to go through our lives saying, God, you are great, and I am made in your image, and so is everybody else. In that awareness, we've got it. But it's hard to stay there. That's why this is school. And here's the great news. Everyone else sitting on your left and your right is in school too. And all of us were invited to go to this school. All of us got full scholarships. Imagine that. We're all on full scholarship from God to be in this school. So then, when you realize that life is a great big school and love is the lesson, well, then you know how to answer, why is it wrong to flip someone off with your middle finger? God, you are great, and I am made in your image, and so is everyone else. Now we know why, when we look in the mirror before we go to church, we kind of know if what we're wearing is appropriate. Does it say, God, you are great, and I am made in your image, and so is everyone else? Teresa of Avila said that this commandment is best followed if we focus on the second part. She said, don't put all your focus on loving God. Put your focus on loving your neighbor, which might sound really strange when you first hear it. But here's what she said. She said, loving God feels so good. When you know how great God is, loving God feels so good, you might just be doing it for the high. You actually might just be addicted to the feeling that you get from loving God, because God is so good. It's easy to do that all the time. But you can't be sure if you're really doing it, because it might just be the high. So she says, focus on loving your neighbor, because there's no high in that usually. That's usually hard. And so if you're doing that, you can know that you're covering both of those commandments. And that's why we're here. We're here to learn. So, it seems to me that our work this week is to see if we can get our hands on our progress report. Thank goodness it's not time for the end of the marking period yet. I'm not ready for that. I hope you're not either. But maybe this is a good week for us to ask, what would my grade be right now in Love School? What would my grade be? How am I doing? 100 years is a perfect time for us to take stock of how we're doing. And I think when we look at our progress report here at St. Patrick's, there's so much to be excited about. It's so beautiful. I mean, just think of all the people who've been fed by the food pantry over the years. Think of all the people who've been clothed through the thrift shop. Think of all the people who went to school next door. For over 50 years, we had this awesome, thriving school. If you're somebody who graduated from St. Patrick's or went there for a while, would you raise your hand if that was your school? Look at this. That school educated so many people, and there's so many that are just absolutely in love with the Sisters of Mercy who taught them. And others are afraid of them, but, Think of all that's happened in this room. As I look out at your faces, I know that some of you met your spouses right here under this roof, and then you married them, and then you baptized your children here. And I know that some of you then buried those spouses from this church. Think of all the encouragement, all the love, all the connection that has happened because of the mission of our church. One of the other questions that was asked of me at the question and answer night was an interesting one. One of those high schoolers said, "How do I know if I've disappointed God?" So that's, I guess, also something we need to look at on the progress report. How do we know if we've disappointed God? How do we recognize when we're not actually mastering our awareness that, God, you are so great, and I'm made in your image, and so is everybody else? It struck me that it's very interesting that our first reading came on the anniversary of this church being built by the immigrants who built up Ravenna and Queens. Most of us, maybe all of us right now, are the children of immigrants and the grandchildren of immigrants. And what do we hear from God's law in the book of Exodus, our first reading? Don't ever put a stumbling block in front of a foreigner. Don't ever oppress an alien. If someone comes here, remember that you were slaves, that you got through the Red Sea. Remember the struggle that you had. And it strikes me that maybe this is one of those things that if we were to look at our progress report, there might be a comment there that says, student is forgetting their roots. Student tends to look at others as different than they are and forgets that that's how they started too. All of us have these immigrant roots here at St. Patrick's, and we brought them, our ancestors did, to this Protestant country and established this beautiful faith right here. And sometimes we're not as open to the next generation coming behind us, even though we heard very clearly tonight that's what God wants. God says, remember how great I am. Remember that you're made in my image. And remember that everyone else is too. If thinking about that, if thinking about how perhaps we haven't always measured up on this part of the progress report is hard, sometimes we can start to beat ourselves up. That's a pretty typical thing that we do when we think about our weaknesses. We get all angry and we beat ourselves up. But what are you supposed to do to get rid of the darkness inside of us? Are we supposed to hit it with a baseball bat? That doesn't get rid of darkness. What gets rid of darkness? Turning on the light. The light of awareness is what can solve any problem we have. The light of recognizing, I forgot for a minute, God, but now I remember. I remember how great you are. And I remember that I'm made in your image. And I remember that everyone else is too. Love made us, and love made us to love. This life we're in, it's a great big school. And love is the lesson.